Have you ever wondered why your grandfather's old truck is still running after 50 years while your modern car needs repairs every few months? What if I told you that some engines were so overbuilt, so ridiculously tough, that they've outlasted the companies that made them? Today we're counting down 10 legendary engines that were built to last forever, and some of them literally have. From diesel workhorses that won't quit after 1,000,000 miles, to gasoline engines that laugh at your maintenance schedule, these mechanical marvels prove they really don't make them like they used to. So buckle up and hit that like button, because we're about to dive into the most indestructible engines ever bolted into a vehicle. Number 10. Ford 300 Inline 6. The Ford 300 Inline 6 is what happens when engineers decide to build an engine the same way they'd build a brick house. Introduced in 1965, this engine wasn't trying to win any races, it wasn't trying to impress anyone with fancy technology, it was just trying to work. Forever. And honestly, it pretty much succeeded. This thing powered everything from F-Series trucks to Econoline vans to farm equipment. The design was so simple it was almost insulting to other engines. One single camshaft, 2 valves per cylinder, cast iron everything, no turbo, no variable valve timing, no direct injection, just pure unapologetic simplicity. Ford engineers looked at all the ways an engine could break and said, what if we just didn't include those parts? The 300 had a 4.9 liter displacement, which is huge for a 6-cylinder. But here's the thing, it only made about 150 horsepower on a good day. That's less than most modern 4-cylinders. Ford didn't care. Neither did the millions of farmers, contractors, and delivery drivers who bought them. Because while other engines were having midlife crises at 50,000 miles, the 300 was just getting comfortable. These engines routinely hit 400,000 miles without major work. Some have passed 600,000. There are documented cases of them reaching 1,000,000 miles with nothing but basic maintenance. One farmer in Nebraska claimed his 1978 F-150 had 800,000 miles on the original engine. When asked about his maintenance routine, he said, oil changes and prayer. Mostly oil changes, the secret was the low-stress design. With such a large displacement making such little power, nothing was working hard. The engine barely broke a sweat at highway speeds. It was like asking a bodybuilder to carry groceries. Sure, they could do more, but why bother? The 300 just hummed along at 2,000 RPM, sipping fuel and outlasting everything around it. Ford kept making this engine until 1996, 31 years of production with barely any changes. When they finally discontinued it, it wasn't because it was unreliable, it was because emissions regulations made it impossible to keep building. Even then, Ford had to practically force people to buy the new V8 trucks. Customers wanted their unkillable inline 6 back. Some still do. Number 9. Toyota 22 RE. Toyota didn't invent reliability, but with the 22 RE engine, they definitely perfected it. This 2.4-liter 4-cylinder first appeared in 1985, and it immediately became the gold standard for engines that refuse to die. If the Ford 300 was a sledgehammer, the 22 RE was a samurai sword. Precise, balanced, and absolutely unstoppable. The 22 RE powered Toyota pickups and 4Runners throughout the 80s and 90s. It made about 116 horsepower, which wasn't impressive even by 1980s standards, but Toyota owners didn't buy these trucks for speed. They bought them because they'd heard the stories. Stories about 22 RE engines with 500,000 miles. Stories about trucks that survived war zones, desert racing, and teenage drivers. Sometimes all three. What made this engine special was Toyota's obsessive attention to detail. Every component was overbuilt. The timing chain was strong enough to tow a boat. The head gasket could probably stop bullets. The fuel injection system was so simple and reliable that mechanics joke it'll outlast the heat death of the universe. Toyota engineers tested these engines by running them at full throttle for hundreds of hours straight. Then they tore them down to look for wear. They usually didn't find any. The most famous 22 RE story comes from Top Gear. They bought a 1988 Toyota pickup and tried to kill it. They drowned it in the ocean, they set it on fire, they dropped it from a crane, they put it on top of a building that was being demolished. After each torture test with basic tools and minimal parts, they got it running again. The engine never gave up, it became a legend, and 22 RE prices immediately doubled. But you don't need British television to prove these engines last forever. Just check Craigslist. You'll find 22 RE powered trucks with 300,000 miles selling for more than they cost new. Owners treat them like family members. There are online forums dedicated to keeping them running, though honestly, they don't need much help. Change the oil, adjust the valves every 100,000 miles, and maybe replace the timing chain at 300,000. That's it. That's the maintenance schedule for forever. The 22RE it proved something important. You don't need massive displacement or advanced technology to build a bulletproof engine. You just need to care about quality more than quarterly profits. Toyota cared. And 30 years later, hundreds of thousands of these engines are still humming along, making their distinctively smooth four-cylinder sound, refusing to acknowledge that they should have died decades ago. Number 8. Mercedes-Benz, 617. In 1974, Mercedes-Benz decided to build a diesel engine that would outlast civilization itself. The 617 wasn't just overbuilt, it was built like Mercedes expected the apocalypse. This 5-cylinder diesel made about 80 horsepower. On its best day, which meant 0 to 60 took about 20 seconds. Mercedes customers didn't care. They were too busy driving to the moon and back. The 617 powered the legendary W123 chassis, better known as the Mercedes 240D and 300D. These cars became the default choice for taxi drivers from Lagos to Lisbon. Not because they were fast or comfortable, they weren't, but because they simply would not break, ever, under any circumstances. It was almost embarrassing how reliable they were. The engine's design philosophy was simple: make everything 3 times stronger than necessary. The block was cast iron thick enough to stop artillery. The crankshaft was forged from what must have been Thor's hammer. The injection pump was mechanical, with tolerances measured in geological time. Mercedes engineers supposedly designed it to run on basically anything flammable: diesel, biodiesel, filtered cooking oil, probably spite if you could liquefy it. These engines regularly pass 500,000 miles without rebuilds. Million-mile examples aren't rare, they're common. In Morocco, there are taxi drivers with 2 million kilometers on original engines, that's 1.2 million miles, on the original engine. Still running daily, the odometers actually break before the engines do, freezing at 999,000 kilometers, because Mercedes never imagined anyone would need more digits. The maintenance schedule was hilarious in its simplicity. Change oil, change filters, adjust valves every 100,000 miles. That's literally it. No timing belts to replace because it used a chain that could anchor a yacht. No complicated electronics to fail because there weren't any. The most complex component was the glow plug timer, and even that was optional in warm climates. But here's the really insane part. These engines get more reliable with age. The first 100,000 miles are actually the break-in period. By 300,000 miles, everything is worn into perfect harmony. The engines run smoother at 500,000 miles than they did when new. It's like they're powered by stubbornness and German engineering pride. Mercedes stopped making the 617 in 1985, replaced by the more powerful but less immortal 602. Old Mercedes mechanics still weep about this. The 617 had achieved something beyond mere reliability. It had achieved mechanical immortality. Somewhere in Africa right now, one is probably starting up for its 10,000th day of work, clattering away with that distinctive diesel knock, ready for another day of outlasting everything around it. Number 7. Chrysler Slant 6. The Chrysler Slant 6 is what happens when engineers accidentally create an unkillable monster. In 1959, Chrysler needed a new 6-cylinder engine. They tilted it 30 degrees to the right to fit under lower hoods. They had no idea they'd just created one of the toughest engines in automotive history. This thing would survive everything from drag racing to demolition derbies to decades of absolute neglect. The Slant 6 came in different sizes, but the 225 cubic inch version became legendary. It powered everything from Plymouth Valiants to Dodge trucks to New York City taxi cabs. The engine made about 145 horsepower, which was decent for the era. But power wasn't the point. The point was that this engine absolutely refused to die, no matter how badly you treated it. The tilted design accidentally created perfect oil drainage. The long intake runners improved low-end torque. The forged steel crankshaft was strong enough to use as a battering ram. But the real secret was the head design. Chrysler used a simple, non-crossflow head that was basically indestructible. You could run these engines without coolant until they glowed red. Let them cool down, add water, and they'd start right up. Try that with any modern engine. Demolition derby drivers discovered something amazing about Slant 6s. They wouldn't die. Other engines would overheat, seize, or throw rods when abused. The Slant 6 would just keep running. Even with no radiator, even with bent push rods, even with half the oil pan ripped off. Derby drivers started seeking out Slant 6 cars specifically because the engine would outlast the entire car around it. The stories are legendary. A New York cabbie put 900,000 miles on one without a rebuild. A farmer in Iowa ran one for 40 years with nothing but oil changes. A guy in California accidentally drained the oil instead of the transmission fluid, drove 50 miles before realizing his mistake, and the engine survived. It's like these engines were blessed by some ancient god of internal combustion. But the craziest part? Chrysler killed the Slant 6 in 1987 for one reason: it lasted too long. Dealers complained they never saw these cars for engine work. The engines outlasted every other component twice over. In the planned obsolescence world of automotive manufacturing, the Slant 6 was bad for business. It was too good, too reliable, too immortal. Today, Slant 6 engines are still everywhere. They power generators, boats, and industrial equipment. Drag racers turbocharge them to make 600 horsepower. Restorers seek them out because they know they'll never need another engine. The Slant 6 proved that sometimes the best engineering happens by accident. Chrysler tried to make a compact engine. Instead, they made one that might outlast the sun. Number 6. Detroit Diesel Series 60. When Detroit Diesel introduced the Series 60 in 1987, the trucking world was skeptical. Electronic controls on a diesel engine? That's just more stuff to break, they said. They were wrong. The Series 60 didn't just change trucking, it dominated it. For 2 decades, this engine powered more semi-trucks than any other, racking up millions of miles and proving that technology and reliability weren't mutually exclusive. This was an 11.1 or 12.7 liter inline 6 that made between 300 and 500 horsepower. But the revolutionary part was the DDEC, Detroit Diesel Electronic Controls. For the first time, a heavy-duty diesel engine had a computer brain. It could diagnose problems, optimize fuel consumption, and adjust timing on the fly. Old-school truckers predicted disaster. Instead, they got the most reliable truck engine ever built. The Series 60 had one party trick that made it legendary: it simply would not wear out. Detroit Diesel built these engines with cylinder liners that could be replaced without removing the engine. Smart idea, except nobody needed to use it. These engines routinely hit 1 million miles without requiring any internal work. Some hit 2 million. There are documented cases of Series 60 engines with over 3 million miles. Still running. Still pulling 80,000-pound loads. Still getting better fuel economy than engines half their age. Trucking companies discovered something incredible. The Series 60 actually saved money by lasting too long. They'd budget for rebuilds at 500,000 miles. That never came. At 1 million miles, they'd tear down the engine expecting wear. They'd find nothing. The crosshatch pattern would still be visible on the cylinder walls. Mechanics started calling them million milers like it was normal. Because with the Series 60, it was. The secret was the perfect combination of electronic precision and mechanical simplicity. The DDEC system prevented abuse by limiting over-revving and optimizing performance. The basic design was bulletproof. A gear-driven camshaft, massive bearings, and a block that could double as a bank vault. Detroit Diesel even figured out how to make the electronics reliable, potting the ECM in epoxy and testing it at temperature extremes that would kill a human. But here's what really made the Series 60 special: it got better with age. The DDEC system could be updated with new software. Fuel economy improved, power increased, emissions decreased. Trucks with 20-year-old Series 60 engines could outperform brand new competitors. It was like Detroit Diesel had accidentally invented a mechanical Benjamin Button. Production ended in 2011, replaced by the DD15. Truckers mourned. Some stockpiled Series 60 engines like gold bars. Others simply kept nursing their million-mile examples along. Because when you find an engine that can run from here to the moon and back, then do it again, you don't let it go. You just keep feeding it diesel and oil, knowing it'll outlast you, your children, and possibly your grandchildren. Number 5, Volkswagen. Type 1 air-cooled. The Volkswagen air-cooled Flat 4 is proof that the best engine design might also be the simplest. No radiator, no water pump, no head gaskets to blow. Just cast aluminum fins and German stubbornness keeping things cool. From 1938 to 2003, this engine powered over 21 million Beetles, becoming the most produced engine design in history. And most of them are probably still running somewhere. The brilliance was in what it didn't have. Water-cooled engines have dozens of failure points. Hoses, thermostats, water pumps, radiators. The VW engine had none of that. Just a fan bolted to the crankshaft and some sheet metal to direct air. It was so simple that shade tree mechanics could rebuild one on their kitchen table, and they did, constantly. Because while these engines lasted forever, they also loved to be tinkered with. The most common version displaced 1.6 liters and made about 60 horsepower. That's not a typo. 60. A modern lawnmower makes more power, but VW owners didn't care. Their cars weighed nothing, sipped fuel like hummingbirds, and would start in conditions that would kill other engines. Frozen solid in Alaska, the VW would start. Baking in Death Valley, still running. Sitting in a barn for 20 years. Add gas and a battery. Vroom! These engines had personality. They clattered at idle like angry sewing machines. They smelled like hot oil in rebellion. They required valve adjustments every 3,000 miles, which sounds annoying until you realize it takes 10 minutes with a screwdriver and a wrench. VW made the engine so accessible that maintenance became a social activity. Weekend Beetle meets were basically group therapy with socket sets. But the real magic was their unkillable nature. The engines were so under stress that catastrophic failure was nearly impossible. Sure, they might burn a valve or drop a cylinder. So what? They'd run on 3 cylinders, throw a rod. The case was magnesium. It would just crack and leak oil, but keep running. One guy drove from Los Angeles to New York with no oil pressure. The engine seized solid when he parked. He let it cool, added oil, and it started right up. The aftermarket went insane for these engines. You could build them to make 200 horsepower. You could turbocharge them. You could put them in airplanes, boats, or dune buggies. They powered everything from Nazi staff cars to hippie vans to Baja race winners. The engine outlasted the Third Reich, the Summer of Love, and Volkswagen's attempts to kill it. Mexico kept building them until 2003 because taxi drivers refused to switch. Today, millions of these engines still clatter away worldwide. They power generators in African villages. They're hidden into kit cars pretending to be Porsches. They're teaching teenagers that engines can be simple, reliable, and fun. The Volkswagen air-cooled engine proved that with good design and a sense of humor, you can make something that lasts forever, even if it sounds like a broken washing machine while doing it. Number 4. General Motors 3800V6. General Motors 3800V6 is the cockroach of the engine world. It's not pretty, it's not powerful, it's not sophisticated. But after the nuclear apocalypse, cockroaches and 3800s will inherit the Earth. This engine powered millions of GM cars from 1988 to 2009, and it did so with the mechanical equivalent of a shrug and a good enough. The 3800 started life as the Buick Vi6 in 1962. GM sold the design to Kaiser Jeep, bought it back, redesigned it, and kept improving it for almost 50 years. By the time the 3800 Series 2 arrived in 1995, GM had worked out every possible bug. What remained was an engine so average, it achieved greatness. It was the most okayest engine ever built, and that's why it lasted forever. This 3.8-liter V6 made between 160 and 240 horsepower, depending on version. It powered everything from Buick LeSabres to Pontiac Grand Prix to Chevrolet Impalas. Rental car companies bought them by the thousands. Grandparents loved them. Mechanics loved them more because they never broke. The 3800 was transportation as an appliance. Boring, dependable, immortal. The secret was conservative engineering taken to an extreme. GM used a 90-degree V6 design which should vibrate horribly. They fixed it with a balance shaft. The heads were iron, then aluminum, but always simple. 2 valves per cylinder, push rods, a distributor until 1999. GM looked at every newfangled technology and said, "Nah, we're good." The result was an engine with fewer parts to break than a hammer. These engines routinely passed 300,000 miles. 400,000 was common. There are documented cases of 500,000-mile 3800s still running perfectly. One taxi driver in Chicago put 700,000 miles on his Impala. When asked about maintenance, he said, "Oil changes and tires." The engine outlasted 3 transmissions, 2 drivers, and the entire Obama administration. But here's the beautiful part. When they did break, fixes were cheap. Head gaskets were the only weak point on early versions, and GM fixed that by 1995. After that, the engines were basically indestructible, parts were everywhere and dirt cheap, any mechanic could work on them blindfolded. It was democratic reliability, blue-collar bulletproofing, the people's engine. GM killed the 3800 in 2008, replaced by the high-tech 3.6 Vi6. The new engine made more power, used less fuel, and broke constantly. Mechanics wept. Customers complained. The 3800 had achieved something special. It was so boring, it became interesting. So reliable, it became remarkable. It proved that in engineering, like in life, sometimes the best solution is the simplest one. Just build it right and leave it alone. Number 3. Cummins 5.9 B Series. The Cummins 5.9-liter B-Series diesel is what happens when engineers design an engine for semi-trucks, then someone crazy decides to stuff it in a pickup. When Dodge partnered with Cummins in 1989, they created a combination that would redefine what overbuilt meant. This wasn't just a truck engine, it was a medium-duty commercial power plant masquerading as consumer transportation. The 5.9 B Series was a straight-six turbo diesel that started at 160 horsepower in 1989. By 2007, it was making 325 horsepower and 650 pound-feet of torque. But those numbers don't tell the real story. The real story is that Cummins designed this engine to run 24 hours a day in delivery trucks. Then Dodge convinced them to put it in pickups. It was like putting a marathon runner's heart in a sprinter's body. The engine was comically overbuilt for pickup truck duty. The block was cast iron thick enough to use as a boat anchor. The crankshaft was forged steel that could probably survive re-entry from space. The connecting rods were sized for an engine making twice the power. Cummins engineers designed it to last 500,000 miles in commercial service. In pickup trucks, where it loafed along at part throttle, it lasted, well, nobody really knows, they're still running. These engines created their own culture. Owners tracked mileage like baseball statistics. 300,000 miles was considered barely broken in. 500,000 was respectable. Million-mile 5.9 engines became legendary, their owners achieving celebrity status in diesel forums. One owner documented 1.3 million miles on his original engine. Still running, still towing, still making boost. The 5.9 had two distinct personalities. The 12-valve version from 89 to 98 was purely mechanical. No computer. Mechanical injection. You could run it on vegetable oil, use motor oil, or probably moonshine if you filtered it. The 24-valve version from 98 to 2007 added electronic controls but kept the bulletproof bottom end. Both versions shared one trait: they absolutely refused to die. Maintenance was almost insultingly simple. Change oil, change fuel filter, adjust valves every 100,000 miles or so. That's it. The engines were so reliable that failure became newsworthy. When one actually broke, diesel mechanics would gather around like it was a unicorn sighting. Usually the failure was traced to some modification or severe abuse. Stock engines just kept accumulating miles like they were getting paid by the odometer click. The 5.9 B Series ended production in 2007, replaced by the 6.7. The new engine made more power but required emissions equipment that made it infinitely more complex. Old-timers hoarded 5.9 trucks like gold. Prices for used examples actually increased. Because everyone knew the truth, Cummins had accidentally built an engine too good for the modern world. Too simple, too reliable, too permanent. Number 2. International Harvester DT466. International Harvester's DT466 diesel is the engine equivalent of a medieval castle, overbuilt, indestructible, and designed to outlast empires. Introduced in the early 1970s, this 7.6-liter inline-six wasn't trying to win any awards for innovation. It was trying to power school buses and dump trucks until the heat death of the universe. Mission accomplished. The DT466 made between 160 and 230 horsepower, which sounds pathetic for a 7.6-liter engine. International didn't care. This engine was about torque. Massive, endless, geological torque. It would pull tree stumps out of the ground at idle. It was designed for applications where failure meant stranded children or stopped construction sites. So International built it like they expected nuclear war. The design philosophy was beautiful in its paranoia. Every component was sized for an engine making 3 times the power. The block was cast iron thick enough to use as radiation shielding. The cylinder sleeves were a wet sleeve design, meaning you could rebuild the entire engine without machine work. The injection pump was mechanical and simple enough to rebuild with hand tools. International looked at every possible failure point and either overbuilt it or eliminated it entirely. These engines powered millions of school buses, and that's where they earned their reputation. School districts discovered something amazing. The DT466 buses never died. Ever. Districts that bought buses in the 70s were still running them in the 2000s. Same engines. Original, unrebuilt, still starting every frozen morning and running all day. Mechanics joked that the buses would rust away around the engines, which would then power the replacement buses. The maintenance schedule was hilarious. Change oil, change filters, maybe adjust the valves every few years if you felt ambitious. That was literally it. No timing belts because it used gears, no head gasket issues because the head was clamped down like international expected earthquakes. No bottom end failures because the bearings were sized for a locomotive. The engine was so understressed it basically maintained itself through sheer boredom. But here's the really insane part. These engines get more reliable with age. The first 100,000 miles just polish the cylinder walls. By 300,000 miles, everything has worn into perfect tolerance. At 500,000 miles, they run better than new. There are documented million-mile DT466 engines that have never been apart. Still running, still pulling, still refusing to acknowledge that mechanical things are supposed to wear out. International stopped making the DT466 in the 90s, replaced by more powerful, more complex engines, but thousands are still running today. They power generators, pumps, buses, and trucks. They'll probably still be running when our grandchildren are old. Because International didn't just build an engine, they built a mechanical middle finger to the concept of planned obsolescence. The DT466 wasn't designed to last 20 years or 30 years. It was designed to last forever. And so far, it's winning. Number 1. Toyota 1FZ-FE. The Toyota 1FZ-FE Inline 6 is the apex predator of reliable engines. This 4.5-liter beast powered Land Cruisers from 1993 to 2007, and it did so with a combination of over-engineering and simplicity that makes other manufacturers weep. While competitors were adding turbos and complexity, Toyota built an engine that could survive the apocalypse using 1950s technology, and it worked. This naturally aspirated inline 6 made between 212 and 240 horsepower. In the 1990s, those were V8 numbers from a 6-cylinder. But Toyota didn't achieve this through high-tech wizardry. They did it through sheer displacement and perfect engineering. The 1FZ was the last of Toyota's big inline 6s, and they made it like they knew it would be their swan song. Every component was overbuilt to a degree that borders on satire. The engine design was aggressively simple. Single overhead cam, 2 valves per cylinder, distributor ignition until 1998. Multi-port fuel injection, but the basic kind that mechanics could actually understand. Toyota looked at variable valve timing, direct injection, and turbocharging, then said, nah, we're good. They built it like a 1960s engine with 1990s materials. The result was mechanical perfection. Land Cruiser owners became evangelists for these engines. They'd post odometer photos like proud parents. 300,000 miles was entry level, 500,000 was common, 700,000 was achievable. Million-mile 1FZ engines weren't unicorns, they were just well-maintained. One Australian mining company documented 2.1 million kilometers on a single engine. That's 1.3 million miles. On the original bottom end. Still running, still pulling. The 1FZ achieved something almost impossible. It was under stress despite making good power. The massive displacement meant nothing was working hard. It would cruise at highway speeds barely above idle. Tow massive loads without breaking a sweat. Crawl through obstacles at 300 RPM like a diesel. Toyota rated it for regular unleaded fuel despite the high compression because they knew owners would put garbage gas in them in remote locations. The engine didn't care. But here's what made the 1FZ truly special. It was the last of its kind. Toyota knew emissions regulations would kill big, simple engines. So they built the 1FZ like a goodbye letter to reliability. They used their best metallurgy, their tightest tolerances, their most conservative engineering. They built it like they wanted people in the year 2100 to still be driving them. Based on current evidence, they succeeded. The 1FZ-FE ended production when the 100 series Land Cruiser was discontinued. Toyota replaced it with the more complex UZ series, FE 8. Power went up. Fuel economy improved. Reliability went down. Land Cruiser enthusiasts still search for 1FZ powered trucks, paying premium prices for high mileage examples. Because everyone knows the truth, Toyota will never build another engine like this. They can't. The world has moved on from simple, overbuilt, forever engines. The 1FZ was the last of the immortals. And somewhere in the Australian outback right now, one is starting up for the 500,000th time, ready for another day of outlasting everything else on the road. And there you have it, that's 10 old engines that were built to last forever. Did you own any of these mechanical legends? Are you still driving one? Let us know in the comments below which engine you think deserves to be on this list. Maybe you've got a million-mile story of your own to share. Since you stuck around this long, hit that like button and subscribe for more content about the machines that refuse to die. And remember, they really don't make them like they used to. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Ever wonder why your neighbor's beat-up old truck from the 90s still runs like clockwork while your newer car keeps breaking down? What if I told you that some vehicles were engineered so well, they practically refuse to die? We're not talking about lucky flukes here. These are machines that were built with one goal in mind: to outlast everything else on the road. Today, we're counting down 10 more legendary vehicles that have earned their reputation as automotive immortals. From desert-crossing workhorses to luxury sedans that shrug off 500,000 miles, these cars have stories that'll make you rethink everything you know about reliability. So buckle up and hit that like button if you've ever owned a car that just wouldn't quit, because we're about to dive into automotive history's most indestructible machines. Number 10. Subaru, Outback, and Legacy. In the mid-90s, Subaru did something nobody expected. They took their reliable Legacy sedan and raised it up a few inches, added some plastic cladding, called it the Outback, and accidentally created one of the most bulletproof vehicle platforms ever made. The thing is, these weren't supposed to be revolutionary, they were just supposed to be practical. But Subaru engineers had other plans. They built these cars with horizontally opposed engines that sat low in the chassis. Perfectly balanced, less vibration, less wear. The result? Engines that routinely hit 300,000 miles without major repairs. And that's just the beginning. The all-wheel drive system they used was brilliantly simple. No complicated electronics, no fancy computers, just mechanical components that worked together like clockwork. Vermont mechanics joke that Subarus don't die, they just get passed down through generations. And they're not wrong. Drive through any New England town in winter and count the 20-year-old Outback still chugging along. The secret was Subaru's obsession with symmetry. Everything was balanced. The engine, the drivetrain, even the weight distribution. This meant less stress on components. Less stress meant longer life. Owners report these cars surviving everything from teenage drivers to cross-country moves to years of neglect. The head gasket issues? Yeah, they happened. But fix that one problem and the car would give you another decade of service. One owner in Colorado documented his 1997 Legacy hitting 500,000 miles. Original transmission, original differential, still running strong. These weren't exciting cars, they weren't fast, they weren't particularly beautiful, but they were honest machines built by engineers who understood that sometimes boring is exactly what people need. And in a world of planned obsolescence, that philosophy created something special, something that refuses to quit. Number 9. Chevrolet Impala. 9th generation. 2006 marked the return of a legend. Chevrolet brought back the Impala nameplate, and this time they built it to last. Not with fancy technology, not with exotic materials, but with good old-fashioned over-engineering. General Motors was in trouble, they needed a hit, so they did something radical. They actually listened to their customers. Fleet managers wanted reliability. Police departments wanted durability. Taxi companies wanted cars that could handle abuse. So GM delivered. The 3.5 and 3.9 liter V6 engines were nothing revolutionary, but that was the point. These were proven designs, refined over decades. Simple pushrod technology, no turbochargers to fail, no direct injection to gum up. Just reliable power delivery, day after day. The transmission was equally robust. The 4-speed automatic might have seemed outdated compared to competitors' 6 speeds, but it was bulletproof. Taxi drivers in New York reported these transmissions lasting 400,000 miles in stop-and-go traffic. Try that with a modern CVT. Police departments loved them too. The Impala could idle for hours without overheating, take curbs at speed without braking, handle pursuit speeds, then immediately return to patrol duty. One retired police Impala in Michigan logged 700,000 miles before retirement, still running, still driving, just too ugly to keep in service. The interior was nothing special. Hard plastics everywhere. Basic electronics. But that simplicity meant fewer things to break. The seats wore like iron. The dashboard didn't crack in the sun. The switches still worked after a million clicks. Rental car companies discovered something interesting. Despite the abuse renters inflicted, Impalas came back ready for more. While competitors' cars needed constant repairs, the Chevys just kept going. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't advanced. But the 9th generation Impala proved that sometimes the best engineering is the simplest engineering. Number 8. Nissan Patrol. Y60 and Y61. Before SUVs became luxury mall crawlers, the Nissan Patrol was busy conquering the world's harshest environments. The Y60 and Y61 generations didn't just survive these places, they thrived. In the Middle East, where summer temperatures hit 130 degrees Fahrenheit, Patrols became the vehicle of choice. Not because they were comfortable, not because they were prestigious, but because when your life depends on your vehicle, you choose reliability. The inline-six engines were masterpieces of simplicity. The 4.2-liter diesel could run on basically anything flammable. Bad fuel, no problem. Contaminated diesel, it would cough once and keep going. No fancy emissions equipment to fail, no complicated engine management systems, just mechanical injection that worked every single time. The chassis was overbuilt to an almost comical degree. Nissan engineers designed it to handle twice its rated capacity. Why? Because they knew owners would overload them anyway. In Australia, mining companies ran patrols 24/7 in conditions that would destroy most vehicles in weeks. These trucks lasted years. One documented patrol in Dubai logged over 1 million kilometers in commercial service, original engine, original gearbox, still earning money for its owner. The cooling system was designed for Death Valley conditions, massive radiators, simple mechanical fans, no plastic parts to crack in the heat. Owners in Africa report running these trucks in 120-degree heat while towing without a single overheating incident. The four-wheel drive system was purely mechanical. No computers deciding which wheel gets power, just manual locking hubs and a transfer case that could handle sledgehammer abuse. If something broke in the middle of nowhere, any competent mechanic could fix it with basic tools. The Y61 refined the formula without ruining it. Slightly more comfort, slightly better aerodynamics, same unstoppable reliability. These weren't vehicles, they were survival tools disguised as SUVs. Number 7. Lexus LS400 1989. Toyota decided to challenge Mercedes and BMW at their own game. The result was the LS400, a car that didn't just match German reliability, it destroyed it. The development story is legendary. Toyota engineers spent 6 years perfecting every detail. They tested prototypes for 2.7 million miles. They rejected 60% of supplier parts for not meeting standards. They even built new factories just to ensure quality. Obsessive? Maybe. But it worked. The 1UZ-FE V8 engine became the stuff of legend. 4 liters, 32 valves, over-engineered to an absurd degree. Toyota designed it to run for 300,000 miles without major service. Many have doubled that. The attention to detail was staggering. Each engine was hand-assembled, tolerances were tighter than Swiss watches. The result was a V8 so smooth that Lexus famously balanced champagne glasses on the running engine, but smoothness was just the beginning. These engines refused to wear out. One documented example in Florida hit 900,000 miles on the original engine. Still running, still smooth, still quiet. The transmission was equally overbuilt. Toyota used a 4-speed automatic that was designed for trucks, then refined it for luxury car duty. The result? Transmissions that lasted the life of the car. No slipping, no hunting, just seamless shifts for 500,000 miles. Even the electronics were bulletproof. While German luxury cars of the era became electrical nightmares as they aged, the LS400 systems kept working. Power seats still moved, climate control still functioned, even the primitive CD player kept playing. Owners discovered something remarkable. These cars actually got better with age. The leather became softer. The ride settled perfectly. The engine loosened up just enough to feel even smoother. It was like Toyota had engineered the aging process itself. The LS400 didn't just compete with German luxury, it embarrassed it. And it did it while costing thousands less to maintain. Number 6. Chevrolet CK 1967 to 1972. They called them action line trucks, but Chevrolet's CK series from 67 to 72 earned a different nickname, Indestructible. These weren't just trucks, they were the template for what a work vehicle should be. The design was revolutionary for its time. Chevrolet lowered the cab and widened the track. Better stability, better visibility, better everything. But underneath that modern styling was old-school engineering at its finest. The engine options were legendary. The 250 inline-six became known as the stove bolt for good reason. It was simple as a hammer and twice as tough. The small block V8s were just hitting their stride. The 283, the 307, the 327, each one capable of outlasting the truck it powered. But the real hero was the 292 inline-six. Truck drivers called it the torque monster. It wasn't fast, it wasn't smooth, but it would pull tree stumps out of the ground and do it for 30 years straight. These engines were so overbuilt that catastrophic failure was almost impossible. The frames were massive C channels that could handle anything. Overloaded? No problem. Twisted by off-road abuse, they'd flex and return to shape. Rust was the only enemy, and even then, these frames often outlasted everything else around them. The transmissions were equally legendary. The SM420 Raw Crusher 4-speed manual got its name honestly. Truck drivers reported shifting these gearboxes with sledgehammers when linkages broke. The transmission didn't care. It kept working. Today, 50 years later, these trucks are everywhere. Farm trucks, shop trucks, daily drivers. They've been modified, restored, beaten, and abused, and they keep running. Parts are everywhere and cheap. Any mechanic can work on them. They're simple enough that owners can fix them in their driveways. One documented example in Texas has been in the same family since new. 3 million miles across 3 generations, original engine rebuilt twice, still hauling, still working, still refusing to die. Number 5, Ford F2 50 and F3 57. 0.3 power stroke, 1994. Ford did something that changed diesel trucks forever. They partnered with International Harvester to create the 7.3-liter Power Stroke. It wasn't the first diesel pickup, but it was the first one that regular people actually wanted to own. The numbers were impressive. 450 pound-feet of torque, enough to pull a house off its foundation, but the real magic was reliability. International had been building diesels for decades. They knew what worked, and what worked was simplicity. Mechanical injection meant no complicated computers. The fuel system was dead simple. High-pressure oil actuated the injectors, but the design was so robust that failures were rare. When something did break, any diesel mechanic could diagnose it with basic tools. No proprietary software needed. These engines were understressed from the factory. Ford rated them conservatively. The internals were designed for much higher power. This meant that at stock power levels, nothing was working hard. Less stress equals longer life. It's simple math that Ford understood perfectly. Owners discovered these engines had barely begun to break in at 100,000 miles. 200,000 was adolescence. 300,000 was middle age. 500,000? Just getting started. One documented 7.3 in Montana crossed 1.3 million miles, hauling horses, original injectors, original turbo, still making rated power. The cooling systems were overbuilt for worst-case scenarios. Towing up mountains in summer heat, the 7.3 barely noticed. The radiators were huge. The fans moved serious air. Overheating was almost impossible if you maintained the system. But the real secret was the block itself. Ford used high-nickel iron that was incredibly strong. The cylinder walls barely wore. Compression stayed high even after massive mileage. These engines often outlasted multiple transmissions and several truck bodies. Today, 25 years later, 7.3 power strokes command premium prices, not because they're rare, because everyone knows they're the last of the truly bulletproof diesels. No emissions equipment to fail, no complicated electronics, just pure mechanical reliability. Number 4, Honda Civic, 4th and 5th generation. The late 80s and early 90s marked peak Honda. The 4th and 5th generation Civics weren't just economy cars. They were engineering masterclasses disguised as everyday transportation. Honda's approach was different. While others cut costs, Honda refined obsessively. Every component was optimized, not for power, not for luxury, but for longevity. The engines were jewels. The D-Series 4 cylinders became legendary for good reason. 1.5 liters, 1.6 liters, single cam, dual cam, didn't matter, they all ran forever. The secret was Honda's fanatical attention to materials and tolerances. Honda used better metallurgy than anyone else. The cylinder walls were harder, the bearings were tougher, the valve trains were precisely balanced to minimize wear. Oil changes were basically the only maintenance required. These engines were so under stress they barely knew they were running. Highway cruising at 3,000 RPM, the engine was loafing. City driving, still not working hard. This relaxed operation meant components lasted seemingly forever. One documented Civic in California hit 750,000 miles delivering pizza. Original engine, original clutch. Still getting 40 miles per gallon. The owner joked that the car would outlive him. He was probably right. The manual transmissions were equally bulletproof. Honda's gearboxes from this era shifted like rifles and lasted like anvils. The synchros were overbuilt. the gears were precisely cut. Even abusive teenage drivers couldn't kill them. But the real magic was the whole package. Everything was designed to work together. The suspension lasted. The steering stayed tight. Even the interiors held up remarkably well. These weren't disposable cars, they were investments that paid dividends for decades. Today, finding a clean 4th or 5th generation Civic is like finding gold. Not because they're rare, because owners won't sell them, they know what they have. A car that will outlive almost anything else on the road. And they're keeping them. Number 3. Mercedes-Benz W124. The engineers at Mercedes had one goal for the W124: build the best car in the world. Cost was secondary, profit margins were irrelevant. They wanted to create something that would last forever. They succeeded. Launched in 1984, the W124 was over-engineered to an almost absurd degree. Mercedes spent over 3 billion Deutsche Marks on development. They tested prototypes for millions of miles. They rejected anything that wasn't perfect. The result was a car that redefined durability. The engines were masterpieces. The M102 inline 4, the M103 inline 6, the OM602 diesel, each one built like a bank vault. Mercedes used forged internals where others used cast. They specified metallurgy that belonged in aircraft engines. They balanced everything to microscopic tolerances. These engines didn't just last, they seemed immune to wear. Taxi drivers in Germany routinely logged 600,000 kilometers without major repairs. In Africa, where maintenance was sporadic and conditions brutal, W124s kept running when everything else failed. The build quality was otherworldly. Mercedes used thick steel everywhere. The doors closed like safes. The body panels were precisely fitted. Panel gaps were measured in fractions of millimeters. This wasn't just about looks, it was about creating a structure that wouldn't deteriorate. Even the paint was special. Mercedes used a multi-stage process that created incredibly durable finishes. 20-year-old W124s often looked better than 5-year-old modern cars. The paint simply refused to fade or chip. But the real secret was the philosophy. Mercedes engineers designed for a 30-year service life. Not 3 years, not 10 years. 30. Every component was specified to last that long. Suspension bushings, wheel bearings, even the window regulators. One documented W124 in Greece has covered 2.8 million kilometers as a taxi. Original engine, original transmission, still earning money every day. The interior still looks presentable. The engine still starts instantly. It's not just a car anymore. It's a monument to what engineering can achieve when cost is no object. Number 2, Nissan Patrol. Y60 and Y61. Wait, didn't we already cover this? No, that was a warm-up. The Patrol's real story deserves the number 2 spot, because in the harshest places on Earth where failure means death, the Patrol became more than transportation. It became legend. The Australian mining industry discovered something remarkable about Y60 Patrols. They could run continuously in 120-degree heat while carrying twice their rated load, not for hours, not for days, for years. Mining companies documented Patrols with over 2 million kilometers in commercial service, still running. Still earning. In the Middle East, the Patrol earned a different reputation. Terrorists and military forces both chose them. Not for politics, for survival. When you're crossing trackless desert where breakdown means death, you choose the vehicle that won't break. Both sides chose Patrols. The 4.2-liter diesel engine became famous for running on anything. Kerosene, it would run. Cooking oil, no problem. One documented case in Sudan had a Patrol running on perfume when fuel supplies were cut. It smelled interesting but kept moving. The cooling system was designed by engineers who understood thermodynamics. Massive radiators, viscous fan clutches that engaged progressively, oil coolers for everything, transmission coolers, power steering coolers, differential coolers. Nothing overheated because everything stayed cool. But the chassis was the real hero. Nissan used fully boxed frames that were ridiculously overbuilt. The metal was thick enough to stop bullets. Literally. UN peacekeepers discovered this by accident and started requesting Patrols specifically. The four-wheel drive system was purely mechanical. No computers, no sensors, just gears and steel. If it broke, which was rare, any competent mechanic could fix it with basic tools. This mattered in places where the nearest dealer was 1,000 miles away. Today, in places where vehicles are tools for survival, the Y60 and Y61 Patrols are still the gold standard. They're not comfortable, they're not efficient, they're not quiet. But when your life depends on reaching your destination, nothing else comes close. They are, quite simply, unstoppable. Number 1, Toyota Land Cruiser, 70 Series. Here it is, the apex, the ultimate expression of automotive immortality, the Toyota Land Cruiser. 70 Series isn't just a vehicle, it's proof that perfection is possible. Introduced in 1984, the 70 Series had one mission: be unstoppable. Not fast, not comfortable, not efficient, unstoppable. And for 40 years, it has never failed that mission. Toyota's approach was different from everyone else. They didn't design for 5 years or 10 years, they designed for forever. Every component was specified to outlast human civilization. This sounds like hyperbole. It's not. The engines are legendary. The 1HZ diesel, the 1HDT turbo diesel, the 1FZ petrol, each one capable of million-mile service. But the 1HZ naturally aspirated diesel stands alone. It makes 96 horsepower. It needs 17 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour. And it will outlive your grandchildren. These engines were designed with one principle: nothing should work hard. The 1HZ displaces 4.2 liters but makes less power than most 2-liter engines. Why? Because under stress, components last forever. The engine barely knows it's running. Oil pressure stays perfect after 500,000 miles. Compression remains factory fresh after 40 years. The chassis is a masterwork of simplicity. Solid axles, front and rear. Leaf springs that could support a building. Frames so overbuilt that catastrophic failure is basically impossible. This isn't sophisticated, it's perfect. In Africa, 8 organizations discovered something remarkable. 70 Series Land Cruisers could run for years with zero maintenance. Not minimal maintenance, zero. Oil changes when they remembered, filters never replaced. Coolant topped up with river water, they kept running. One documented example in Tanzania has been running since 1986 with no major repairs. The odometer stopped at 999,000 kilometers. That was 15 years ago. It's still the village's primary ambulance, still saving lives, still refusing to die. The United Nations specified 70 Series Land Cruisers for their most critical missions, not because of politics or pricing, because when failure means people die, you choose the vehicle that won't fail. They chose the 70 Series. Toyota still builds the 70 Series today, not because they have to, because perfection doesn't need updating. The design is essentially unchanged after 40 years. Why mess with perfection? In places where vehicles are the difference between life and death, the 70 Series isn't just transportation, it's a lifeline. It's hope. It's proof that humans can build something that lasts forever. And that's why it's number 1, and there you have it. That's 10 more vehicles that were engineered to outlast everything else on the road. From the unstoppable 70 Series Land Cruiser to the bulletproof W124 Mercedes, these machines prove that planned obsolescence isn't inevitable. Which of these automotive legends have you owned or driven? Drop your stories in the comments below. We love hearing about cars that refuse to die. And hey, if you enjoyed this countdown, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. We've got more automotive deep dives coming your way. Until next time, keep those old warriors running. They don't make them like they used to, and they probably never will again.